on the table. Me and my baby, yeah, we're out here on the floor. Oh yeah. So Mr. DJ, keep those records playing, 'cause I'm having such a good time dancing with my baby. Everybody's swinging. Sally's doing that twist now. If you play request style, got a few for you. Play that one called Soul Twist. Play that one called I Know. Don't forget the mashed potato. No other songs will do. So Mr. DJ, keep those records playing, 'cause I'm having such a good time dancing with my baby, having a party. So Mr. DJ, keep those records playing, 'cause I'm having such a good time dancing with my baby, having a party. Everybody swinging, dancing to the music on the radio. Yeah, we're having a party. Everybody swinging, dancing to the music. Yeah, on the radio, bringing way down there. We're having a party. Everybody swinging, dancing to the music. On the radio, we're having a party. Everybody swing.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Monroe County Chamber of Commerce for our Business Summit today on August 27th of 2020. And as I've said throughout many of our chamber events, a new and interesting way of doing things in the time of COVID. So here we are, joining you from the River Raisin Center for the Arts, and of course live streaming our Business Summit today. So we thank all of you who are joining us online. We'd like to thank everyone that's also made this event possible, including Derek Arnold with River Raisin Security and Technologies LLC, and Mike Trapp with River Raisin Center for the Arts, our host here today. As many of you know, I'm Matt Buds with More Buds Law, and I'm the current past chairman of the Monroe County Chamber of Commerce. Happy to be with you today and to MC today's event. The bulk of our Business Summit today is going to be a pre-recorded event that was held virtually on May 12th of 2020 by the Great Lakes Bay Region chapter of Conscious Capitalism Incorporated. And it's with their permission that we share that mission and the timely and relevant information about business as a healing force, and that we hope to bring that to you today, and that you'll share it with other members of the Monroe County business community. The Conscious Capitalism Incorporated, their mission is to elevate humanity through business, and they achieve this by growing together and through the use of conscious principles and best practices that I know many in our community have started to adopt as well. The Monroe County Chamber of Commerce has been guided by these conscious business practices since first becoming aware of them in 2015 and joining that movement of conscious businesses and organizations, cascading a message that business can be a force for good. And by engaging and empowering and equipping our communities as we help to develop the next generation of leaders and to move our business community forward. And together we hope that the mission that you'll hear today can help change the practice and perception of business so that it's seen as a force for good. Conscious business practices are helping to evolve our world so that people can flourish and lead lives that are infused with passion, purpose, and creativity while they continue their business endeavors. Conscious capitalism builds and supports a global network of entrepreneurs, business leaders, and those dedicated to growth of the business community through conscious leadership while offering learning and development opportunities and other ways to grow both personally and through your business. Our overall mission for this event is that capitalism works, period. Its power to positively change lives is really unparalleled in our community. But misuse of capitalism's power by some has led to negative stereotypes such as greed or misconduct or exclusion. It's our view that this is an inaccurate way of thinking about business, and it seems to be almost an unshakable narrative that we hear in our community from time to time. But there is a better way to be a capitalist, a way that will create a better world for everyone, and a way to move your business forward, a way that will hopefully bring forward spirit of business and collective entrepreneurial activity in a way that is more inclusive and helps with the challenges that we all face in our community today. We hope that you will see conscious capitalism as that path forward. Before we begin the recorded portion of the summit, we'd of course like to make some introductions and thank our sponsors that made these events possible for the Chamber. So I'll ask each of our three Platinum sponsors to come up and take a moment, tell us about their business and what's happening in the community from their perspective. Our first sponsor is First Merchants Bank, and joining us from First Merchants Bank is Amanda Phoebus.
Thanks, Matt. Seems like we were just here a week ago with the Chamber bringing us together, whether that's in person or virtually. Thank you to Michelle and the Chamber for always bringing these valuable events to our community. On behalf of First Merchants, I really want to echo the sponsor remarks made last week. It's a story of collaboration. No company stood up here and just talked about themselves. I'm proud of our community. Our people are taken care of through the work of the United Way, the Community Foundation, and leading businesses like DTE, Lazy Boy, ProMedica. We all have the privilege of supporting our communities. I know our businesses are taken care of. First Merchants processed over 700 of those PPP, Paycheck Protection Program loans. It's just a massive amount of volume. So our businesses and our people are taken care of. It's going to continue to take all of us working together and thinking about our role our businesses can have in our community. I know a little bit about how a company's culture and how they operate can be a driving positive force for the surrounding group. I'm excited to hear more from today's program.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you to First Merchants Bank. Our next sponsor for today is Lazy Boy Incorporated, and from Lazy Boy we have Sue Vanasacker. She'll tell us a little bit about Lazy Boy and continue our message here today. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you, Matt. Since 1927, Lazy Boy has been guided by our founders' dedication to doing the right things for our employees, our customers, and our communities around the world. Lazy Boy believes in our collective responsibility to manage and protect the world's natural resources for our future generations. We are vigilant with regard to the environment, integrating sustainable business practices to reduce the impact of our operations both locally and globally. Regarding our community relations initiatives, Lazy Boy is committed to enhancing the quality of life in the communities which we live and serve through our leadership, financial contributions, and volunteer efforts. Our philanthropic initiatives include the Lazy Boy Foundation, local community involvement, disaster relief, and our corporate partnership with Ronald McDonald House Charities. Our employees exemplify this spirit through leadership and volunteer efforts during our Lazy Boy Summer of Caring. Since its launch in 2018, our employees have accumulated over 13,000 hours of caring. This program corresponds with our Lazy Boy corporate mission statement and is a great addition to the overall corporate social responsibility initiatives. We know our founders would be proud to know that the tradition of giving back and caring about our communities is alive and well today. Thank you to Michelle and the Chamber for allowing us to help sponsor this informative program with a message that is so very important. Together, we can all work to change the practice and perception of business so that it is seen as a force for good where people can flourish, leading lives infused with passion, purpose, love, and creativity. Thank you.
Thank you again to Sue and Lazy Boy. And last but certainly not least, from DTE Energy is Molly Lumpert-Coy. She'll say a few words about DTE and about their role in the community, and maybe have a bit to say about one of our speakers during the presentation as well.
Well, I too want to take a minute to thank Michelle and the Chamber, on behalf of our 1,500 employees that work, live, and volunteer in the Monroe County community. I certainly appreciate the great work that the Chamber does in bringing this event to you. When I was chair of the Chamber, we actually instituted this event, and I think it's been like 8 years that this has been ongoing to provide learning opportunities for our businesses and great business networking. With that, today is something I think very timely, and that's conscious capitalism. I'm very excited for you to hear our personal story from DTE from Jerry Anderson, our executive chairman of DTE. Conscious capitalism is socially responsible economic and political philosophy where businesses operate ethically by serving the interest of all of its stakeholders. By doing what is good, the business in turn will do well. At DTE Energy, along with the other sponsors here today, from First Merchants, from Lazy Boy, we're all in the business of doing what's good for the community and being a force for good in the community. At DTE, we have our tagline, which is a force for growth and prosperity in all of the communities that we serve. And we strive very hard to keep this in mind in everything that we do. During the pandemic, it's been a real challenge for everyone. I know our foundation has helped with about $21 million for the state of Michigan, helping with COVID crisis funding. 2 million masks that have been delivered to first responders all around Michigan. And our volunteers last year accounted for 16,000 volunteers and 232,000 hours of volunteer service. It's a part of their job, it's a part of what they do, and a part of giving back and being a leader in the community. So I think every business, no matter what you do, can make an impact, small, large, just by sharing their time, talents, and treasures. And I hope that you find today's learning a really wonderful experience. That's something that we personally have begun the journey at DTE. So thank you so much, and thank you again to the Chamber.
Thank you again to Molly and DTE. We also acknowledge our other sponsors. Our silver sponsor for the event today is ProMedica Monroe Regional Hospital. Our bronze sponsors are the Manikin Smith Group and the Monroe County Community Credit Union. And our support sponsors are Closet Creations, Exciting Windows Couture by Karen, and the Krebs Building Company. So thank you again to all of our sponsors. Without them, our events like this could not move forward. As we move now to the prepared portion of the Business Summit, I'd like to just give you a brief bit of introduction about our two speakers that you will see. First, Raj Sisodia is an author, professor, co-founder, and co-chairman of Conscious Capitalism Incorporated. He has a PhD in marketing from Columbia, has written over 11 published books, including New York Times bestsellers, and really the catalyst for the start of the conscious capitalism movement in his best-selling books from 2013 and 2015. Our second speaker today is going to be Jerry Anderson, the executive chairman of DTE Energy, where he has been since 1993 and holding various senior executive leadership roles. He's the architect and leader of the company's strategy, as you heard from Molly just a few minutes ago, and is concentrating on developing a positive and engaged culture and connecting DTE to the communities that it serves, enabling them as a force for good. So we hope that you enjoy the prepared portion of this Business Summit today, and we'll look forward to any questions or comments near the end of the program. We may run slightly beyond our 1 o'clock time, so we'd appreciate your patience for that as we move forward, and we hope you enjoy the presentation today. Thank you for being here.
I'm really happy to be with all of you today. I'm going to talk about the concept of healing in business. And you're going to hear from Jerry Anderson later, who's one of the great exemplars of a healing organization and a healing leader. happy to be with all of you today. I'm going to talk about the concept of healing in business. And you're going to hear from Jerry Anderson later, who's one of the great exemplars of a healing organization and a healing leader, and you'll hear from other leaders as well. Let me just share my presentation here. So our theme today is healing our world and what is the role of business. You know, this idea of healing was relevant even before we had this crisis, but certainly it feels even more poignant and relevant today. So if you look at what is, at a macro level, what is this crisis telling us? It is showing us, first of all, that a lot of what we believed in the past was wrong, in terms of our ability to mobilize, our ability to cooperate with each other and get a lot of change. You know, things that might have taken 5 years have taken a matter of weeks. And we have come around to the idea that business is fundamentally about taking care of people. So we're challenging old dogmas around shareholder value, profit maximization, etc. All of those questioning was underway even before this, but now it's even much more. So this is a time when it's really an opportunity to reinvent and rethink a lot of what we have in mind in different sectors of society, and especially in business. And I think in business, this is a fundamental reminder of a core message of our book and of our movement, that we human beings are here on this planet to take care of each other. That's our primary role, right? To evolve ourselves, to realize our potential, and through that to take care of each other. And business is a way that we can take care of each other at scale. You know, individual capacities, we can only take care of a handful of people, but when you start a company, you can do that for a lot more. But the energy behind it has to be one of genuinely caring for people and not just using them to achieve our goals. Now, if I think about the times we are in, and again, this is not just referring to COVID, but generally the broader focus of where we are in our evolution as human beings and on this planet, I'm reminded of Charles Dickens in A Tale of Two Cities, where he said it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. You know, there's never been a better time to be born a human being than today by most objective measures. Our life expectancy is greater than ever, our level of prosperity, our level of education, you know, access to technology, the opportunity to lead a meaningful life, all those things are far greater than ever. But at the same time, it seems like we've got this dichotomy going. It's the age of wisdom and it's the age of foolishness, season of light, season of darkness. Spring of hope, winter of despair. You know, which direction we go in the future depends a great deal on our consciousness in this moment, especially when it comes to the sector of business. If we operate with business in a way that is genuinely putting people at the center and the flourishing of the planet as our primary concerns, then in fact we will take that high road. We will continue to evolve towards a kind of heaven on earth. But if we don't, we are creating conditions that are quite hellish already. You know, life is beautiful and filled with joy, of course. We've all experienced the joys that life is capable of bringing to us. But at the same time, we also know that there's so much tragedy and there's so much suffering in the world. And if you look at the macro trends, so on the one hand, Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, shows how this is the best of times, and also shows that we are living in the most peaceful time in human history. So we are more prosperous than ever, and physical violence is down. Fewer people are being killed by in wars and by murderers and terrorists and all of that. And other kinds of violence are also down. So that's wonderful. But on the other side of the ledger, psychic suffering has gone up. Anxiety, depression, drug addiction, and even suicides have been rising for decades. Again, even before this present crisis. And of course, planetary suffering, we know, is almost on the brink of disaster. You know, I read a report recently from the Earthwatch Institute, and they said the most important creature on this planet is the bee. That bees are actually far better for the world than we human beings, if you think about it. Bees actually enable the world to function. And we human beings, as the only species which has free will and the ability to choose, unfortunately, we are choosing in a way that is systematically destroying our own habitat and decimating other species. We're doing all that in the name of economic prosperity and essentially indulging ourselves. So I think there's a fundamental wake-up message here from the planet, from nature, that the way in which we are operating as human beings, as in a way the stewards of this planet, as the most evolved life form on this planet, that we are in many ways operating in a way that's contrary to the well-being of the rest of this system. So we just think about what's happened in the last 100 years. You look at the forest cover on this planet, right? The natural forests mostly gone, 80%. A lot of the land, because of deforestation and other things, has kind of become desertified. So that land that used to be arable is no longer. 90% of the mammals, large mammals, are gone in the last century. 95% of the large fish are gone. And if you look at the statistics on what the impact that we're having on animals, and not just on other species, but the animals that we use in factory farms, right? The cattle and the pigs and the chickens and others, it's quite a horror show, actually. If you look at factory farming, that 75 billion animals worldwide are killed every year. And 100 billion fish are farmed and killed every year after living tortured lives. Yeah, they're caged, right? They're put in extremely crowded conditions. Of course, that also spreads disease and the potential for future episodes, viruses and so forth. There's an antibiotic resistance that's going on, but also it's just a sheer amount of suffering that we are inflicting. By the way, another 1 trillion wild fish. Right? So our footprint on this planet in terms of lives lost and suffering caused is quite enormous. We are living through the 5th mass extinction in the history of this planet, and the first one that's really largely caused by human activity, where half of all species alive today are likely to be gone. We know about the insectopedia, we know about bees, colony collapse disorder. I mean, these are potentially ruinous developments. And we also know that the toxic burdens on our bodies is rising, the rates of cancer, diabetes, many other diseases, in addition to the psychic things I talked about earlier. These are all rising, right? There's a cumulative effect of the way in which we've been living and consuming and producing. So if you look at the impact of pollution, pollution kills 9 million people every year, 15 times more than all of these other causes put together. And again, that's a choice in a way that we make, a way in which we choose to operate our factories. There are ways to mitigate that, but we choose not to, or we don't have the economic reasons to do so. So with so much suffering in so many different dimensions, I believe that healing has to be the great purpose of our times. And we need healing at every level. We need to heal ourselves. Most of us have a lot of trauma that we are carrying around within us from our childhood and from life experiences. And of course, physically and emotionally and spiritually, we need to heal. Our families need healing. Our communities need healing. We need to heal our companies. Many companies are places of suffering, as I will talk about here, and our countries. In addition to our country, many other countries are more divided today than ever before. We need to heal our planet and its ability to sustain life. And that may be one of the biggest things we have to do. And also we need to heal the past in order to heal the present and the future. There are actions that we can take in the present that will help heal the past. There are things that have happened in the past. We need to acknowledge what has happened. We need to make amends for that. And then from that place, we can then move forward and heal the present and heal the future. So in that sense, I believe we all need to think of ourselves as healers now. Not just doctors and nurses are healers, but we are all in a way healers, because what do? We reduce suffering, we can elevate joy. That's what I define as healing. As the Dalai Lama said, our prime purpose in this life is to help others. And if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. And I think the grim reality is that we are actually hurting each other, and we're hurting the planet, and we're hurting countless lives out there in terms of animals. In an extraordinary way. So we need to turn that around. Because if we don't consciously make that choice, if we don't consciously choose to be part of the healing, we are probably part of the hurting. Most of us don't get up every day saying we're going to cause some suffering, but because of low consciousness, that's exactly what we end up doing. So we have to consciously choose to say, how can I be a force of healing? Whatever be my job as a teacher, as a CEO, whatever we are. And as James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So we have to face up to this reality, first of all. We have to acknowledge the reality of the suffering that exists and has been caused. So for example, the statistic that heart attacks are highest on Mondays by 20%. I still remember when I first came to that region, and on the drive back to the airport, Gene told me, he called doctor's office, a cardiologist, and they couldn't pick up the phone for 45 minutes on a Monday morning. And that's right there in Saginaw. It's crazy what we're doing. This is essentially our work is killing us. Heart attacks are 20% higher on Mondays. What does that tell us? Jeffrey Pfeffer's book a couple of years ago documented the number of Americans dying from stress related to work. So not the work itself, but the way we lead, manage, and organize. An estimate, a conservative estimate of 120,000 additional deaths a year due to that. In China, the estimate is that 600,000 people die from overwork. And they had to invent this new word called gualaozi, death from overwork. And the Japanese, by the way, had to invent a similar word for the same thing. Our economic system is exacting a toll on human lives and human suffering, which is just unconscionable if you really pause and think about it. We don't have to kill people to make money. And the saddest irony to me is that even our healing professions, doctors, nurses, veterinarians, those have become places of suffering. They have higher rates of depression, drug addiction, and suicide than the general population. Doctors kill themselves, at a rate that's double the overall average. So again, this is noble, meaningful healing work. But the way we run our hospitals and our healthcare system is causing tremendous despair and all this suffering. So clearly the way we work isn't working. We need to just reinvent the whole thing. And the good news is that if we do it right, business can actually alleviate suffering and elevate joy. This is not a necessary cost of doing business. In fact, I will show quite to the contrary. If you do it in the right way with the right mindset, it can actually be on the other side of the ledger. So this is not about healing businesses. This is not about saying we need more yoga studios and massage parlors and meditation retreat centers. This is saying that business itself can be a healing activity. It doesn't matter what business it is. So this is about business as a healing vocation. I choose to go into business because I want to be a force for alleviating suffering and elevating joy in the world. So I believe in that sense, business can be a place of healing for those who work there. We can leave at the end of each day mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and socially in a better place than when we came in the morning for our employees and their families. Business can be a source of healing for those we serve, and it can be our customers and our communities, and it can be a force for healing in society. Business can show us how we work together towards a common goal, a higher purpose. Despite all of our differences, ethnic, religious, political, whatever they might be, this is a unifying force if we do it right in society. I'd like to share a few of the stories from the book. I would have shared the DTE story if Jerry was not with us, but you're going to hear that wonderful story a little bit later. I'll share a couple of others. This one we call the parable of the pothole. And this is probably one of the most universal of the stories in the sense that it points to a situation that exists in almost every company, which is that there's a kind of a caste system, if you will, that exists within most companies. That you've got the salaried, college-educated, professional people with benefits and leadership development plans and all kinds of things on the one hand, and then you've got the hourly workers who actually do most of the work in most companies, whether it's manufacturing or whether it's a call center, right? 80-85% of the people. And life is very different for those two groups of people. So they work for the same company, same leaders, same espoused values, same culture, supposedly, but the reality of their lived existence is very different. So this is the story of a company called Apple Tree Answers, which is the second largest call center company in the US. And John Ratliff created that by acquiring a whole bunch of smaller companies and putting them together. And then he started to look at the business in a more systematic way, and he started to get employee engagement and employee turnover numbers. And he found a stark contrast. Again, the salaried professionals engagement was pretty high in the 60s, and turnover was pretty low in the teens, annual turnover. And then he looked at the hourly, and the engagement was in the teens, and the turnover was 118% a year. In other words, people were lasting about 10 months on average in those jobs. And he started to say, wow, that seems extremely high. And he was going to an industry conference, and he mentioned that one of the things he hoped to learn was how do we reduce employee turnover in our industry. The guy next to him said, well, the industry average is 158%, so you're doing something right. You need to be giving the talk, not listening. Right? So he said, no, that's not acceptable. So then he started asking people about their lives and their work and what can we do to make it better. And he found simple things like the chairs in which they sat gave them backaches. So of course, we'll change the chairs. And then he asked them every day, tell us something we can do to make your life better. And he soon also discovered the economic realities of their life. When they pay $10, $12 an hour, whatever the wage was at the time, and minimal benefits. Even those working full-time were struggling, and they were living life in a way on the edge. So the story we used to illustrate that is that imagine their CFO was driving into work one morning and her Mercedes hits this pothole and her tire blows out and the rim gets damaged. She pulls over and calls AAA and they show up pretty quickly and they tow the car and then she gets a ride to the office and she's about an hour late. And everybody is very solicitous of her and say, oh my God, that must have been so scary when your tire blew out. Can I get you some coffee? Are you okay? And then later that afternoon, the car is delivered back to the office and it's repaired and it's washed and cleaned and insurance took care of most of it. So this was a non-event in her life, and yet people showed a lot of caring towards her. Now I said, imagine one of our hourly workers is driving that same road in her $800 17-year-old Toyota Tercel and blows out a tire and damages the rim. And she doesn't have AAA, and she has to call around and get a tow company to move the car off the road. And then she has to call her friends to get a ride because she can't afford the $35 or whatever, because she lives far away from the workplace to be able to afford a place. And finally gets to work 3 hours late. And she's told the supervisor is waiting to see her. He seems pretty mad. And she goes in and she gets reprimanded harshly. And she's told, this is a black mark against your record. And 2 more of these and you will be fired. And at the end of that, she's told, now go and answer the phones and be nice to our customers. Now, you know, her life is falling apart. She has no idea how she's going to get through this, and we kick her on her way out. She has $160 in the bank. She doesn't know how she's going to get home or get back to work, how she's going to drop her kids off, what's going to happen to her, and nobody cares. And that's a tragedy, which is pretty common, I would say, in most companies. So John said, we need to do something about this. So they started a program called Dream On. It's kind of like Make-A-Wish. Right? They said, okay, we know that life is full of potholes and there are things that are happening out there that we don't have control over, and we don't want that to derail your life. You know, the statistics are that 50% of Americans have less than $400 in the bank. And if they needed $2,000 within 30 days, they would not be able to raise that money. So they're that close to ruin. So he said, if you have a need in your life, an unanticipated expense or something, please let us know and we'd like to help. And for 10 days, nobody responded. You know, people are stoic and people are heroic. They walk around carrying these enormous burdens and they want to appear professional and they don't want to seem helpless and vulnerable. And the fact is, if you could see a thought bubble over everybody's head that you meet on a typical day, it would break your heart just to understand what they are thinking about and what they're worried about and what they're dealing with. They've got a child addicted to opioids and they've got a mother in the early stages of Alzheimer's, and all kinds of things happen. Life is tough enough. And then our work adds to that. So for 10 days, nothing happened. And then finally, 10 days later, they get a submission on their website. And this woman who writes in starts by saying, I am so sorry. My ex-husband stopped paying alimony 2 weeks ago, and my 2 kids and I got evicted from our apartment a week ago. And we've been living in the car now for a week. And I'm so sorry. I just can't do this to them anymore. I need help. So, you know, this came across John Ratliff's desk, and he reads it and he said, all I felt was a deep sense of shame. He said, what kind of a leader am I? What kind of a company am I running here? It's a full-time employee, a mother with 2 children, and she's homeless. And it took her this long just to even let us know that. So of course, they immediately reached out to her. They got her into a hotel that night, and then they helped her find a new apartment. They helped her with the first month, last month, you know, all of that incredible hurdles you have to go through to get an apartment. And then they told her, you know, if you want, we can keep this confidential. We don't have to let others know. She said, no, nobody has ever done anything this nice for me in my entire life. I'm going to tell everybody I know. And she did. And of course, the word got out. And after that, the floodgates opened, and there were so many stories came pouring in. And there were other people who were homeless, and there were people dealing with all kinds of things, and they helped them each one by one. Fast forward a year or 2 later, the culture of this company has been completely transformed. Their employee turnover rate went from 118% down to, I think, about 18 or 16%, which is kind of unheard of in that industry. And you can imagine the financial performance implication. Yeah, of course, they spend money helping people, but when your employee turnover goes from 118 to 16%, you know, your productivity and your employee recruitment and training costs, all of that, you know, you're going to have a positive impact on the business. That is not the reason to do it, however. You do it because it's the human and humane thing to do. This second example comes from India, where this is a leader, CEO of a company called Jaipur Rugs, and he said, I'm all about serving and protecting the innocent. He saw that the carpets in India, these beautiful hand-woven carpets that we buy, they are made by a particular community in India, the weaver community. That's kind of a hereditary, you're born into that. And it's mostly made by young girls and women because of the manual dexterity. And this, unfortunately, is considered one of the untouchable castes. India has this terrible caste system, and the lowest caste is actually doing the menial work. And then a lot of them are considered untouchable. So imagine being born into that, and imagine being born a girl into an untouchable family. That is about as low as you can get in terms of your prospects for life. Right? And because you're educated last, you're fed last, right? You have this terrible difficult life where they start cooking and cleaning and looking after their younger siblings when they are still in their 8-9 years old, and then they get married off when they are in their teens, and they get married to another weaver family, and they have to cook and clean and start having babies and also make carpets and make money. And they get abused by their mother-in-law, and they get abused by their husbands, who are often alcoholic and abusive. And then the contractors who come to these villages with orders for carpets, and they bring the yarn and they bring the order, and they tell them, okay, I need this carpet woven to this design within this amount of time, and this is what I'll pay you. And then they end up not paying them, or not paying them on time. And of course, there's other kinds of abuse that they inflict on them as well. So life is hellish for these women. And Mr. Chaudhary said, these women are the innocents of this world. They have never done anything but serve other people. I want to serve them. I want to serve the innocents. And I met one of these women. Her name is Shanti. I went and visited them. And that was her story. That was her life. And she had 5 children. And at times her family was on the brink of starvation. She had to sell whatever little jewelry she had. She was abused by all kinds of contractors. And then she was discovered by Mr. Chaudhary and Jaipur Rugs, and became part of that family about 7-8 years ago. And her life has completely transformed. This illiterate woman, they have a foundation that educates them basic reading, writing, and math skills, accounting skills. Right? And now she has 5 children, and one has already graduated college, one is in college, one is in 11th, one is 10th, and the youngest is a boy in 7th. From this untouchable illiterate woman, 5 children are going to graduate college because of this company and what it has done for her and her family, given her respect and dignity and a path forward. And I asked her, how do you feel about Mr. Chaudhary? And she couldn't even answer. She just started crying. She said, I don't even have words. And then finally she said, to me, Mr. Chaudhary is more than my mother and my father. He is like God, because he has given me life. I didn't have a life before this, and now I have a life. Now you multiply that by 40,000 women whose lives have been transformed. And they sell a carpet. They say, we're not selling you a carpet. We're bringing you a family's blessings. Because you choose to buy this carpet, and they have a barcode on the back of every carpet, you can get the story of the family who made it and the impact on their lives from this company. That we are transforming lives. So that leads to conscious and healing of consumers as well, conscious consumption and healing us as customers when we realize the power of what we can do with our spending. Another story is about changing industry norms. Every industry has kind of standard operating procedures, and we need to look at all of those afresh. So consulting is one of them, right? In consulting, typically you're gone Monday to Friday as a consultant on a client site, which means that your kids essentially grow up without you. And the founders of this company in Atlanta, they were at Accenture, they were all making partner, and they were starting to then also get married and have children. And they looked around and they saw their colleagues. Every evening they would become kind of heavy-hearted, and they would be calling home and trying to sing lullabies and say goodnight to their kids. And they're just like, wow, this is a high price to pay for being a consultant. We don't want to miss the entire childhood of our children, because when we go home on the weekend, we're so busy catching up on various things that we really don't have a real connection with our own kids. So they said, that's too high a price to pay. So we're going to change that. So they quit Accenture and they started their own consulting company in Atlanta. And they said the biggest rule here is all our clients will be local. You don't have to travel for work as a consultant. And if we get a lot of business in Chicago, we open an office there. We open an office in Dallas. We open an office in Charlotte. That's what they've done. And they said children of employees are our stakeholders too. They explicitly put children in that list. They actually assess the company every year based on how families feel about the company. If you think about it, every company really should think that way, because the way we lead impacts the way people live. And it does impact multi-generational impact. Just like Shanti's children's lives are kind of enhanced, many other businesses, children's lives are negatively impacted because of the way in which the work culture operates. This one is about what I call confronting social sadness. One of the things in our society, which I think is the saddest, is the level of prison population or criminal justice system, where there are 70 million Americans that have some kind of criminal record, the same number that have a college degree, by the way. And a lot of that is for very minor offenses, drug possession, etc. But we have these harsh sentencing guidelines in the 90s and beyond. So people's lives were decimated by that, long sentences for minor things. And when they come out and they try to get a job, what happens? There's a little box you have to check, right? Have you ever been convicted, etc. And 70 million people have to check that box, and most doors get slammed in their face. And so they never get a chance. So there's a Zen master named Bernie Glassman who decided to take on this challenge. And he started a company called Greyston Bakery in Yonkers, New York, which is one of the richest counties in America, but has one of the highest homeless levels as well, rates as well. And he said, we don't hire people to bake brownies, we bake brownies to hire people. He said, I want to give people a first chance, not even a second chance. He said, there are many people in our country that don't even get a first chance. They're born into terrible conditions. They have terrible schools. They're surrounded by drugs and violence. There's no prospects. There's no future. And then they get caught up in that in their early stages of their life. And then they are locked there for life. So I want to give people a first chance. So they hire people using what they call open hiring. There's no interviews and there's no background checks. They have a list. You put your name on the list. They hire the next person. This is Dion Drew, who spoke at our conference, and he had tears in his eyes. He said, I was in jail 3 times. The last time for 3 years. Every time I come out, nobody gives me a job. I end up back on the street corner. This time I found Greyston, and now he has a little girl. He's a training supervisor. He makes $70,000 a year. If it were not for Greyston, I would be dead or back in jail. And that's the impact that business can have. And healing communities, I think you're not going to hear a better story than what you're going to hear from Jerry later, but I'll just give you one other one. HEB, which is the most beloved and largest retail chain in Texas, grocery chain, tremendously loved. They have lower prices than Walmart, and yet they pay their employees far better and treat them far better. The employee turnover is a tiny, tiny fraction. Most people work full time. Most people get stock ownership in this private company. Billions of dollars were distributed to them. It is just beloved by all stakeholders. They're the largest single donor to the entire state of Texas. They do all kinds of wonderful work, and they especially show up in times of need. So when you had hurricanes, like Hurricane, what was the last one, Harvey, right? They have a 7 days a week, 365 days a year disaster recovery operation that's always working, and they show up. This was a tweet that somebody sent out in that time. I'll see your FEMA and Red Cross and raise you my Texas grocery. They show up before FEMA and Red Cross in times of need. And they will reopen their stores in 2 days, and they'll get water and bread and whatever is needed all over they've got helicopters, and there's a whole operation that they have. Right? So it's incredible how wedded they are and committed they are to their community, and how much they show up in times of need, and the extent to which people have deep love for this company. And by the way, it was started by the grandmother of the current chairman and CEO, Charles Butt. And there's something about that. There's something about the mother energy that's missing in business. Caring, compassion, inclusiveness, empathy, that's all the mother energy, the classic, mature feminine energy. And that's what business has been lacking. Business has been run mostly by men with hyper-masculine energy, domination, aggression, competition, winning results at all costs. Charles Butt says to his executives, please, let's pay our people as much as possible, not as little as possible. Most companies see employees as a cost to be minimized. They said, no, let's figure out a business model where we can actually give them as good a life as possible while they work in retail. Costco does the same thing, by the way. Costco pays their people extremely well and gives them wonderful benefits. Right? It's not a cost to be minimized. And by the way, they end up being highly efficient and productive and all of that, and they still compete on price with Walmart, as I said earlier. So whether you become a healing organization or a hurting organization really depends on the leader. Leaders set the tone. If you are a leader who has not healed themselves, you cannot actually run a healing organization. You have to first start. By the way, I had to go on my own journey of self-healing before I was able to write this book. I took about 5 months off and tried to do that. I'd like to end on this thought. There are 2 things that are locked away in the corporate closet that we don't talk about, right? One is unexpressed love. Human beings have a need to care that's even greater, stronger than our drive for self-interest. And yet our work doesn't allow us expression for that. We're supposed to put on our mask and armor and go to battle and do our jobs and capture market share and destroy our competitors. And there's that whole militaristic mindset and energy in business. So we have all this unexpressed caring within us. To be professional means never showing those feelings. And then on the other hand, we have all this silent suffering. As I said earlier, if you could see a thought bubble over everybody's head, you would recognize the deep pain that we all share. Our vulnerability is what ultimately unites us. Now, if we allow these two things to come out of the corporate closet, right, then that love will find expression, and that will start to heal that suffering. And that will create a tsunami of healing throughout the organization. I think this is what we're able to do. I think in many ways that's what DTE did as well, as you will hear from Jerry. Thank you very much. I really appreciate all of you being here today, and I look forward to listening to the rest of the morning here.
Well, thank you, Raj. Wow, I'm just amazed at again the stories that you told, especially the one about the pothole, and just elevating the idea that we can all be healers, and just really engaging with our staff and understanding the pains that they may have. Thank you, and that's a great start. Now I'd like to introduce Jerry Anderson, the Executive Chairman of DTE Energy, and he joined DTE in 1993. In his time at DTE, Jerry built a highly engaged culture and connected DTE Energy to the communities it serves. Recently, Jerry joined the Conscious Capitalism Incorporated Board of Directors and is co-chairman of the Governor's Michigan Economic Recovery Council. So he's working with Governor Whitmer in trying to start up Michigan again. He's been really busy at that. At the Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit last year, I heard Jerry's presentation. His story is an inspiring message to CEOs on the importance of empowering people in your organization and by embracing a higher purpose. And there's much more. So Jerry, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Gene. I really appreciate that. You know, when I first received this invitation to speak this morning, I think it was last fall, we had no idea the circumstances that we would find ourselves in on May 12th, 2020. But interestingly, the topic chosen back in the fall was the Great Recession that occurred a little over a decade ago now, and the leadership lessons that I learned during that time. And I hope you'll find some of the lessons that I learned in that prior crisis, frankly, a crisis that I didn't expect to repeat, much less be exceeded. I hope you'll find some of my lessons useful. So I'm going to take about 20 minutes to describe the decade of my leadership at DTE Energy that commenced with the Great Recession. And then I'll share a few lessons that I learned in the process, and then Raj and I will go to Q&A. So a little over a decade ago, in mid-2007, DTE Energy was a thoroughly mediocre company. And to be honest, probably worse. And the measurables told the story. Our safety, our employee safety, was routinely in the fourth quartile in our industry. Our customer satisfaction consistently showed up at the bottom of our Midwest peer group in J.D. Powers. Our costs benchmarked poorly. Our total shareholder return, routinely fourth quartile in our industry. But perhaps most conspicuously, our employee engagement was consistently fourth quartile. And the engagement of our union employees, half the employees at DTE, was worse, 9th percentile. I remember the day I saw that number, bottom 9% in engagement, and thought nothing good comes from that. I told my top 200 leaders in mid-2007 that I had concluded that the root cause of all of this was a deeply broken culture, and that our job was to fix it. But to be honest, I really had no idea how to do that. Now, at about the same time, I began to study continuous improvement seriously for the first time to try to improve the productivity of DTE and its quality. And in the process, I learned a core continuous improvement principle from a Toyota tutor that I had at the time. He said, at the core of continuous improvement, Jerry, is a deep respect for the dignity of people. I remember not quite getting it at first, but you know, if you put that differently, you could say that if you want to ask for the best from your people on behalf of your company, then you need to stand for the best in their futures. That's only fair. Or if you want to put it a little more crudely, you can't ask for their best energy and creativity in improving the productivity of your company and then say, hey, thanks for the productivity. By the way, we really don't need you anymore. That just isn't a fair bargain. So with that on my mind, I entered 2008 and began the decade that transformed my understanding of what it means to be a leader. You know, we worked our way through 2008 as we normally did, developing a plan for 2009. Then as we worked our way into the fall, the stilts beneath the world economy began to wobble badly and then fell out altogether and collapsed. And surreally, at the epicenter of that global economic crisis stood Detroit, Michigan, and our auto companies, and so much that was broken. And we were the energy company that served all of that. And the word began to arise in the energy industry that DTE Energy would become a junk bond utility, a company thrown in the scrap heap of other mediocre companies in Michigan. Well, I remember pulling my leadership team together just prior to Thanksgiving in late 2008 and saying, everything that we've worked on this year is now scrap. We have something enormous washing over us. We need to understand that and develop a plan to deal with it. So go home and enjoy the Thanksgiving break. And then when we come back, we've got 10 days to put together a new plan. Well, 2 days into that 10-day planning period, two of my top leaders came to me and said, we've sized the problem and it's big. And the numbers are clear. There's no way to deal with it without a large layoff. Probably 20% of our employee population will need to go. And I thought about that in light of that lesson from my Toyota tutor, the dignity of people. And I knew that the decision I would make would shape the culture that I hope to form at DTE for a long, long time to come, because people were worried and they were watching me closely, and the decisions that I made would reverberate for years to come. And so I ended up making a decision, I have to say on intuition maybe more than anything, that shaped the rest of my career. And that was the decision to fundamentally bet on our people. Late in 2008, I taped a communication and sent it out to every employee at DTE. And that message said, look, we're being hit by something really big, you know that. And I'm not sure I can make many promises, but I will make this one promise. The last lever we'll pull at DTE to keep this company whole is to lay people off. But in order for me to make good on that promise, I need a promise from you. You need to bring every ounce of energy and creativity and focus that you can bring to the task of keeping this company whole and making it better. And if all 11,000 of us band together to do that, perhaps we can see this company through well, and I can keep my promise. Well, I remember over the Christmas holidays in 2008 saying to my wife, I really hope this works. And I remember entering 2009 kind of taking a deep breath. And then at the end of January in 2009, my controller at the time, Peter, came to me and said, hey, we beat our plan for the first month. Well, with everything happening around us, steel mills closing, auto plants closing, talk of bankruptcy everywhere you looked, I was surprised. February came. Peter came to me, same result. And when Peter came to me at the end of March and said, hey, we beat our budget for the first quarter of the year, it was the first time I said to Peter, Peter, you better check your financial close model because I think you got a break in it. This does not make sense. April, beat budget. May, GM is spiraling into the arms of the federal government. Chrysler the same. Economic wreckage around us. Beat budget. And in June, Peter came to me and said, we beat our plan actually by a good bit for the first half of the year. And I said to him again, Peter, check your financial close model. There is a break in it. Because what I was hearing simply didn't make intuitive sense to me. July, beat budget. August, I was at my cottage on the shores of Lake Michigan in Grand Haven. The weather was cold. I was in a sweatshirt. And I said, this is the month. We sell energy for air conditioning. There's no air conditioning being sold now. We're going to get creamed this month. Peter came to me in early September and said, we beat our budget in August. And I slammed my fist on the table and said, find the break in your financial model. And Peter slammed his fist on the table and said, Jerry, there is nothing wrong with our financial model. This is just what's happening. And that was the first time that I really accepted that the bet that we had made on our people was actually working. I sort of abandoned my financial intuition and went looking for what was happening. And what I found was thousands of discretionary acts out amongst our people to make our company better and stronger. Well, to make a long story short, in late fall 2009, we invited the financial community to Detroit, that same community that said we would be a junk bond utility, and told them that we were raising our earnings guidance for the year, materially actually. We had a strong cash flow year, which was surreal to me at the time, in the middle of the deepest crisis that we'd seen in a century to that point. And in my self-evaluation for the board of directors in December, I said, I have learned more this year than in any year of my career by a wide margin. And everything I have learned is about people and what they're capable of if they truly believe in something and care about something. Well, I entered 2010 then asking myself, how do we sustain this energy level as the crisis fades? Because our people were smart. They realized that we'd gotten through the first year of the crisis and that we were going to be okay. Well, I had a habit of bringing employees in for breakfast. I get about a dozen employees from varying levels of the company. And in early January 2010, I had one of those breakfasts. And at the end of the breakfast, there was a woman standing off in the corner. I could tell she was waiting to talk. So I said goodbye to the rest of the group and then walked over to her and we chatted for a bit. And then I asked, was there something that you wanted to talk about? And she said there was. She said, I never got a chance to properly thank you for what happened this past year. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, look, my husband worked for one of the auto companies. He was laid off immediately. And we have 3 very young children. I was deathly afraid what would happen to them if I were laid off too. But when you said that the last lever we pulled was a layoff, it gave me hope. And I joined our fellow employees and we saw things through. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for giving hope to my family. And I looked at her and I realized why my financial intuition had not caught up the year before. You see, she was fighting not just for our company, she was fighting for what she loved most, her young children. That brings a lot of energy. But then she pivoted and she said, you know, I sense we're okay. There's so much around us that isn't. I have brothers who are still laid off. My community is broken, our city and our state. What can we do to help all of that? That was like a moment of revelation for me. I realized that her energy was turning outward. It was turning outward from how we can save ourselves to how we can help other people, help our communities. She was offering me the opportunity to transition my leadership from crisis to aspiration, from saving ourselves to helping to save others. And so after that, I began to talk about DTE's role in fixing Detroit, standing Michigan back up. And I said to people, if you want to help your neighbors, if you want to help your community, make our company better. We're the biggest investor in Michigan year in and year out, and that's true. We invest billions in our communities. Make that an engine of economic development. And everybody pays our bills. Make our company more efficient, and you'll lighten their load. And let's defy the image that people have of companies in Michigan as mediocre and broken. Let's make this a strong and a good, even a great energy company, and defy that stereotype. And it really worked. Our people were hungry to help their friends and their communities in crisis. And the energy level within the company rose. And with it, our engagement measures rose. I had another transformative experience in early 2011. So one of our board members was Joe Robles, and Joe was the CEO of USAA, the company that serves members of the military and their families. And I traveled to Texas on a benchmarking trip, really. USAA is really good at customer service. We were there to see their call center operations. And so we visited Joe in his office, and then we walked down into the middle of their call center operations, and Joe began to point out some of the particulars of the operation. I was captivated by his people. They had a bright energy. They were smiling. They reached out their hands and said, "Welcome to Michigan, Mr. Anderson." And when we got back to Joe's office, he was ready to sort of jump into business. And I said, "Wait, Joe, how do you produce that?" He looked at me and said, "Produce what?" And I said, "That energy, the vibrancy of your people. It's so tangible." And so Joe put down his papers and said, "Look, Jerry, the first job of any leader is to create connection to purpose. That job you just saw my people doing is a really hard job. Often the people on the other end of the phone are impatient, sometimes angry. My job is to keep reminding them that that person on the other end of the line is somebody really important. It might be somebody deployed overseas. It might be their spouse. It might be somebody who served our country in a really proud way in the past, and they deserve our best service." And then he brought out videos that told stories of the people they serve and their heroism to create that connection. They were emotional videos. I mean, they brought tears to my eyes, and I didn't work at the place. And that night on the plane flight home, I sat with my small team and said, we ought to be able to do the same thing. We produce outputs that are vital for modern society. We ought to be able to create the same connection for our people. And so when we got home, I charged our communication team with making a similar video to try to communicate our purpose. I have to be honest, I was torn between whether this would be great or be seen by our people as a little bit hokey. I remember the first time that we showed that video at a gathering of 200 of my leaders. I sort of held my breath waiting for the reaction. And when the video ended, there was a moment of silence and then a thunderous standing ovation. and requests from my leaders to get the video immediately so that they could share it with their people. And when they did, I got reports back of tears in the eyes of grizzled veterans in power plants. I realized that we tapped into something deep, because all they wanted to know was that their work and what they focused on for decades and given their energy to was really important in the end. And our communication was helping them to understand that. Well, as we focused on this work of culture and mindset and purpose, our measurables, the hard side measurables of the company, began to move in our favor. All of them did, in fact. In the spring of 2012, just 5 years after I told our leaders that our culture is deeply broken, we won our first Gallup Great Workplace Award, which is reserved for the top 10% of companies in Gallup's worldwide database around engagement of employees. And I have to tell you, I could tangibly feel the difference in our people now, in their demeanor, in their energy level. They were behaving the way Joe Robles' people in Texas behaved. And that was so encouraging to me. You know, some of the most interesting work was with our unions. Now recall, our unions started in the 9th percentile, the bottom 9%. And I remember clear to this day a pivotal meeting with our union leadership. Frankly, I was frustrated in the meeting. And I challenged our union presidents. I told them that the low engagement of their members was an indictment of me, yes, but it was also an indictment of them. And it was our job to work together to fix that. And I asked them to undertake that work with me. And they did. And our unions by 2014 had moved from the bottom 9% to the 90th percentile of Gallup's engagement database. So what did all of this work yield? So by 2019, last year, the thoroughly mediocre company of a decade earlier was in a very different place. Our employee engagement was in the top 3 to 4% of Gallup's worldwide database, the 97th percentile. We had won the Gallup Great Workplace 8 years in a row. We were one of 10 companies ever in their database to do that. Our safety was #1 in our industry. The National Safety Council does a culture survey. We showed up in the top 2% of their culture survey. Our customer satisfaction was pretty regularly #1 or 2 in the Midwest. And our total shareholder return, which had consistently been top quartile, was very different. So for the decade that I just described, our total shareholder return was 275% versus 83% for the Dow Jones Utility Index, which is our comparator. So really more than 3x. And finally, Points of Light, which is a group that focuses on community service by companies, named DTE Michigan's top corporate citizen 2 years in a row, 2018 and 2019. And we were the only utility company in the nation who had received that award. So our focus on people and purpose and service had dramatically improved my company and its results for the better. So what did I learn from this journey? Well, I have 6 thoughts that I'd like to share with you in closing. First, the fountainhead priority at every company is maximizing the available human energy, maximizing the discretionary energy that your people will give. Everything else at a company is contingent on that first and most important priority. Second, people give their discretionary energy to what they love and believe in and admire. Your job is to make your company worthy of that. If you don't, that energy will go elsewhere. It'll go to families, nonprofits, or to something else that they care deeply about. I have to say that's especially true at a time like the present. But if you do, if you make your company worthy of that energy, it is absolutely magical and transformative. Third, the surest way to do this, the surest way to earn that discretionary energy, is to tie your company visibly and tangibly to the service of other people. Most people are drawn to helping other people, to serving others. They will give their best energy to that. That's one thing I've learned with certainty. And they will give their best energy to our companies if we can show them that serving others is what we're fundamentally about at the core of our work. And again, that's especially true at a time like the present. And through all of this, I've come to understand a company is nothing more than a place that people come together to combine their collective energy to put it at the service of other people. Fourth lesson. Our first job as a CEO or a leader is to stand for all of this and stand for it unwaveringly. If drawing discretionary energy is so critical to our companies, and if we earn it by making our companies a place that stands for serving other people, then our job one for a CEO, is to relentlessly stand for this. And Raj is right when he says that the consciousness of an organization will not rise above the consciousness of its leader. And so our job is to work on ourselves first, to expand our own understanding, and then we have the right to spread it. Fifth, this work will require courage. The allure of the hard side of business will be a constant siren song that tries to pull you away from this work. Look, I was raised on the hard side of the business world, and I suspect many of you were as well. I studied engineering and physics as an undergraduate student. I studied finance and economics in graduate school. I worked for McKinsey and spent years on strategy and problem solving. I had a constant voice in my head, even when I knew better, that said, you should be focused on strategy right now, or you should be out doing a deal versus focusing on your people. And that voice is wrong, but it will be there. And you need to maintain your conviction, because if you don't, nobody else will. They follow your lead on this. And sixth, and finally, Raj's use of the word healing, the healing organization, is exactly right. To be honest, when he first mentioned that phrase to me in a phone call, my initial reaction was, well, isn't that a bit much or maybe too strong? But after some thought, I realized, no, he's exactly right. Our society has so many ills that need to be cured, so many things that need to be healed. And if we're waiting for the government or nonprofits to provide the cure, that wait will never end. Now look, they certainly have an important role to play, but ultimately the problems are too big for them to handle alone. In our society, so much of the power and capability reside in the private sector. And if our society's ills are going to be addressed, we have to see it as our business to be in the middle of the healing. But looping back to that first fountainhead priority, maximizing the available human energy in our organizations and drawing discretionary energy. There is no better way to tap that energy, no better way to deserve it and make it available to our companies than by being part of this healing process and by becoming a healing organization. And how true does that ring today as we face a nearly unprecedented economic challenge that has at its core the literal need for health and healing? This crisis offers us the chance to show our people that we stand for what is most essential. We'll fight hard to preserve the economic health of our company, sure, but we will fight first to preserve their health and the health of the people that they love. And if you meet the intense challenge that this crisis is serving up, and you do that in your own way that's unique to your company, but you do it with heart and with principle, your people will see that. And it will shape their impressions of you, and it will shape your company's culture in positive ways for many, many years to come.
I'm really happy to be with all of you today. I'm going to talk about the concept of healing in business. And you're going to hear from Jerry Anderson later, who's one of the great exemplars of a healing organization and a healing leader, and you'll hear from other leaders as well. Let me just share my presentation here. So our theme today is healing our world and what is the role of business. You know, this idea of healing was relevant even before we had this crisis, but certainly
part of the Chamber's Business Summit. As I was saying, thank you to everyone for participating. Hopefully that you enjoyed that insightful message from both Raj and Jerry, as well as from the Great Lakes Bay Region chapter of Conscious Capitalism. We thank you for the ability to continue to bring that message, and we hope that you will share that message with others at the Chamber and outside the Chamber community. We hope that the Chamber will have additional discussion and dialogue about this concept moving forward in the future. We hope once, I'll say, we get back to whatever we think normal might look like here in the future, that this will be part of the Chamber's message and something we can talk about when we're all together more in person as we make our way through this COVID situation. If you were interested in participating more with this type of messaging, we'd love to hear from you at the Chamber. Feel free to reach out to Michelle or Steve or any of the other Chamber board members as well. The takeaway message, I think, today is that our former pattern of behavior is no longer effective, and that the teachings of conscious capitalism and that mission, trying to elevate our communities and our humanity through our business, is more applicable now than ever. And I'll say that in light of both COVID and I'll say the strife that we're having throughout our country. Hopefully our business community can band together and really be a call to action and to move our communities forward. So hopefully taking some of the tips from what we saw today and from our continued dialogue about conscious business practices, that will all advance our communities and ourselves individually forward through our businesses. Again, we'd like to acknowledge all of our partners that made today possible. Derek Arnold with River Raisin Security and Technologies LLC, and Mike Trapp with River Raisin Center for the Arts for our live streaming and our hosting here. And of course, we couldn't have these events if it wasn't for our sponsors. And so for the Business Summit sponsors, we'd again like to thank our platinum sponsors, First Merchants Bank, Lazy Boy, and DTE Energy. We'd also like to thank our silver sponsor, ProMedica Monroe Regional Hospital, and our bronze sponsors, the Manikin Smith Group and Monroe County Community Credit Union. Our support sponsors today were Closet Creations, Exciting Windows Couture by Karen, and the Krebs Building Company. Again, thank you to all for your participation today. We hope you found this to be an informative event, and we look forward to seeing you, whether that be virtually or in person, at future Chamber events as our circumstances will allow. Thank you again for joining us today.